Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to talk about something fairly abstract, but I think it's an important thing, so hopefully you can get through this with me. I'm going to talk about that feeling you get when you read a book and you say to yourself, something's not right. You say to yourself, there's nothing wrong with the art, there's nothing wrong with the story that I can put my finger on, but I don't like it. Something's wrong and I can't figure out what it is. And I'm going to go over that feeling and explain why I get that feeling and what I do to explain that feeling, because these are the kinds of things that I sort of studied, right? How to explain why you get that kind of feeling. Because, well, first of all, I actually got trained in a crash course with this kind of thinking because I lived for most of my life in a place that's really trusting, right? And everybody said what they meant and meant what they said. And you trusted everybody, and you didn't lock your doors at night or take your keys out of your car, right? That's the kind of place I grew up in. I mean, I don't lock my door now at nighttime, but I live in the middle of the woods. Who's going to break in? The wolves? If they can get through the door, if they can figure that out, they can eat me, because bully for them. But, you know, I lived in that kind of place. I live in that kind of place. And when I got to university, I got a rude awakening because I trusted everything that was presented to me. And I looked at everything and said, yeah, they're telling me the truth. I should believe it. And the professors had to take me to the side and say, you can't read things that way. You can't do that. You got to actually look much deeper. You got to read between the lines. They would say, look here, look at this, what we're reading right now. The guy says very emphatically point A here at the first. But then a little while later, in a couple of chapters, he says point B, which contradicts exactly point A in every point. But he does it very subtly in point B. But when you look at all the rest of his argument, they're according to point B, not point A. So what he did with point A was he put it at the first very loudly to deceive you, to open up the mind of people who think in this specific way in order to sell them a bill of goods. Because they think to themselves, well, he said point A, and therefore all of these ideas that follow must follow point A. And so he's trying to deceive you. You can't let him do that. Right? And so I had to become very good at reading between the lines. I was given a crash course in that. And you also had to, at some level, just look at the people who were writing it and why they were writing it. Because when you study the ancients and the medievals, right, they're always trying to get to truth. That's what they were trying to do. With their arguments, they were trying to get at truth. And so if you pointed out something wrong that they have done logically, because usually they base it on logic and ideas like that, they would be very happy because it would show something that was interfering with them getting to the truth. But when you read the moderns, my professors had to say, no, you got to look deeper because they're not using logic. They're using just ideas. They're trying to sell you a bill of goods is what they're trying to do. They're trying to do it very subtly. They're just trying to sell you a bill of goods. Their arguments don't have to make sense. And to some extent, you got to look at the person who wrote this and why they wrote it as well. The greatest example of this that I studied would be Nietzsche, of course. He would be someone who came up with his own philosophy, you know, almost from scratch. And he was probably just the sole creator of it, and he should be the person, since he's the sole creator of it, to know it better than anybody else. And therefore to be able to live it better than anybody else because he knows it better than anybody else. But when you look at his actual life, he couldn't even live the smallest part of it. Here was a man who said every other man should be at constant war with each other, and he meant actual war, but this guy couldn't even stand the sight of blood. So there's no way he could follow his own philosophy, and if he's the one who actually knew it best because he came up with it, then something's got to be wrong there. So you got to look at the person and the reason why they're writing it. Because, of course, they're trying to sell you something. So you got to look deeper. So I got a crash course in reading between the lines and looking deeper at these things and looking at underneath of what they're saying and having to look at who they are as well. And this is why and how I look at things that I read today. And you really have to do that today, especially because of all these far leftist ideas out there. Because, of course, that's what far leftists do. They put in these subtle things to convince you of their idea. they're trying to propagate their idea. So they use propaganda. They try to sell you their idea in a way in which you don't actually engage your reasoning mind. You don't engage that part, but they sell it to you anyways, underneath. And as I've said in a number of other videos, right, one of the first things that your far leftists do when they take control is they seize control of the presses, because they want to control everything that you have for information. So they make sure that they are in control of the information that you get. That's the major reason, though. There's also a minor reason, which they start even before they're able to take control of the presses. And that minor reason is to sell you a new language, is what they're trying to do. They're trying to present everything in a new language. And they're trying to sell you their ideas very subtly through this new language. What they're trying to do is, in effect, create a new morality through a new use of language, so that you follow their leftist morality. And they do it very subtly, of course, because they might get very ham-fisted in doing the story itself, whether it be a news story or a comic book. They might get very ham-fisted in doing that, but at the same time, they're getting their point across underneath with how they use language, with what they say and what they don't say. And that's what happens in comic books today, because they're trying to sell you a new morality. And there's a reason for that, of course, because they hate Western civilization. Very specifically, they want to get rid of Western civilization and everything that Western civilization is built upon. They want to wipe it off the face of the earth. And the thing is that Western civilization, for the most part, is built upon something which is a guilt culture. Now, this is something which I studied a lot, and it's a major academic field, and many people do study it particularly, is the changeover in the ancient world from a shame culture to a guilt culture. There's a big change there. And the difference being is that a guilt culture is where you are exposed to a morality, usually from the very beginnings of your life. As you grow up, you are exposed to this morality, and you take it into yourself, and you grow with it, and it becomes part of you, and you shape it to yourself, or it shapes you to itself, depending on what you believe and how you feel that you need to interact with it. And when something goes wrong in your life, you do something wrong, who do you point the finger at? In a guilt culture, you point the finger at yourself. You say, I've done wrong. I know this. I must punish myself, or I must make amends for this. And so you point the finger at yourself. But in a shame culture, this morality isn't internal. This morality is external. And in a shame culture, when you do something wrong, if you get caught, and that's very specifically needed to be said, if you get caught, because in a guilt culture, you're always caught because you're dealing with yourself. You can't hide from yourself, but in a shame culture, you can hide. So if you get caught in a shame culture, well then, this external morality of the society then shames you by taking away some of your societal benefits. Could be as extreme as even exiling you, which the ancients used to do. And so the thing is that there was this changeover from a shame culture at the late ancient period into a guilt culture. And for a little more than 2,000 years now, we have lived in a guilt culture, and all of Western civilization is built upon part of this fundamental building block of a guilt culture. And the thing is that leftists want to get rid of that. And they've been trying to get rid of that for a couple of hundred years now. But they weren't able to actually do it until about the 1960s and 1970s. And our culture in the West stopped being a guilt culture at that time and became a shame culture again. But they did it very subtly, because they made sure that this new shame culture, this new shame morality, still looked like the old guilt culture. But now that they are getting bold, they're trying to sell you, and have been, I would say, for the last 20 years, to sell you a new morality. They want to sell you this new morality, so that this is the shaming morality that is in the culture. Because the kind of things that they're trying to sell you, well, they would include things like diversity. Of course, that is a good of this new morality. Affirmation. That is a good of this new morality. You have to affirm people. You have to be self-affirmed, and you have to affirm others. This is one of their new goods, right? You have to be tolerant. That's another good. You have to be tolerant. And you can see this coming through in your stories, in your comic book stories, where all these people, all these characters, it's always just self-affirmation. It doesn't look like reality. Of course it doesn't look like reality. They're trying to set up this new morality with this new language underlying the story. You know, there's always self-affirmation, and there's always other characters affirming each other. And some of the things they have to get rid of, well, ideas of good and evil. They have to get rid of those. And they do that by getting rid of ideas of heroes and villains, or at the very least, making them so similar that you can't tell the difference between the two. And I'm looking at books today like Heroes in Crisis, where you have this crisis center where both heroes and villains go to get psychiatric help. Psychiatric help, yeah, that's another leftist tool right there. But they go there, and there's no distinguishing between the two. There's no distinguishing between heroes and villains there in this story. Because why? The leftists think there is nothing to distinguish between a hero and a villain. Because there's no such thing as good and evil. There's just, in these worlds, superpowered beings. And a hero can be a villain, and a villain can be a hero in these kinds of stories. This is selling you their new morality, of course, because you got to erase those old ideas. And you also have a new language of how to shame people. You know, call them Nazis, call them alt-right, call them bigots, call them homophobes, call them any of these kinds of words. That's the new shaming language. And they're trying to bring that out again in the books, of course. And here's the thing, okay? That's why I would say there's something, if you get that feeling, that's what's scratching at the back of your mind. You're saying to yourself, something's not right here. Something's not right with this. There's nothing wrong per se with the story. There's nothing wrong per se with the art, but I don't like it. I really don't like it. I can't put my finger on it, but I don't like it. And I would say that's probably what it is that you don't like. Now, I can hear probably someone saying that, well, what's the difference, right? Who cares? Who cares if it's a guilt culture or a shame culture? It doesn't really matter to me. Well, here's why it matters. Hopefully I don't have to convince anybody why far leftists are, I wouldn't even exclude using the word evil, because everywhere in the world that a socialist, communist ideology has taken root and been made into a government, it has had devastating results and had a trail of bodies lying after it. And not just bodies, but enslaved people as well. I think the count is now over 100 million murdered by socialist, communist governments in the last 100 years alone. That's not even to say the billions upon billions that have been enslaved. So hopefully I don't need to convince you of that. But to bring it down to a more personal level, there is a much more personal reason why you need to care about the difference between a shame culture and a guilt culture. And you have to watch out for this new shame culture. Why? Because in a shame culture, those shaming norms, that new morality, it's like an extra set of rules. It's not quite law, but it's very close to law. Where when you break those norms, you will get shamed by the society. You will get punished by the society, of course. And it's very easy for that punishment to become law. And these shaming mechanisms, of course, as I said, they're external. It's an external morality. So in your guilt culture, where you had a morality and you shaped it towards yourself, or at the very least, it shaped you internally and you were part of the process, you know, it's an internal thing. In this shame culture, no, you have an external morality that is chosen by someone else and is imposed directly upon you. You have no say in it. You have to follow it. And you have no say in it. And as I said, all these good ideas that we take for granted right now are built upon ideas of guilt culture. Number one would be free speech. If you get to have the new morality of the shame culture of the left that they're trying to build, there is going to be no more free speech. Why? Well, because right now they're selling you all of these ideas subtly with their language underneath. But there's always the problem that you might go back. You might start thinking for yourself. You might start using that old language again. So once they take control, enough control, well, they make sure that you can never go back. And how do they do that? By making sure they can control how you speak and what you say. And if you don't think this is going on in the world, you need to take a really good look at the world. Because if you're in America, your really cushy position might be threatened pretty soon, because the rest of the world, Europe, even Canada, now have speech laws. And not just speech laws to prohibit things that you can say, speech laws to compel you to say things, specifically say things, at certain times, in certain places. You have to say things, or you will be breaking the law. And these things, of course, are far leftist things. You have to affirm these far leftists and their chosen pronouns for what they wish to use. And if you do not, you break laws. And so free speech will be the first thing to go if they really get their claws into this idea of setting up a new shame culture. And they're trying to do it, of course, through our comic books by selling this new morality underneath to the kids that they are targeting, because they're always targeting children. They're not targeting us older comic readers. They never do. I have never seen any of their advertisements that would say that the older comic readers are the people that they are specifically targeting with this. They will be an outlier that they might drag in, but they're specifically targeting the young so that they can sell them this new language, so that they can bring them up under this new language, so that they can make sure that those children will have this new language embedded in them, and to make sure that they think that it's a shame culture. It has to be. That's the only way it is. You can never go back. And that's why I fight for heroes. And I even fight for villains. That's why when I review things, when I look at things, I fight for these things. Because there needs to be a sense of right and wrong in these stories. There needs to be a sense of good and evil. There needs to be heroes. And there needs to be villains. Alright, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Give me something new to think about. I'll see you later. Bye.